They're sisters, both beautiful and both smart, and both are published authors, and their books are not just any ordinary books because they talk about substance as well. One talks about the Japayukis in Japan, and another talks about the sexualization of men or Asian men in Hollywood. Racel and Celine, hello and welcome to Kababayan, LA.
Thanks for having us.
How are you?
Great.
I guess I'll first talk to Celine because you wrote this book about, what is the title of the book again?
The book is called Straight Jacket Sexualities, and it's about Asian American men in the movies, U.S. movies.
And we actually talked about, we devoted a full show on that. We had producers here and some Asian actors here on the show, and they talk about how it's slowly changing, but still the operative term is slowly, because it used to be that, you know, Asian men are portrayed as, like you said, you know, gays or just very asexual roles in Hollywood. And you're saying that in your book, it's not really so.
Right. So I wrote this book because I myself have two young boys, you know, growing up in this country. And having grown up in the Philippines, I know what it's like to see images of yourself in the films, you know, like dark Filipino women, you know. But for them, I'm very sensitive to how they don't see themselves in films. And so I looked at the archive to see what is their legacy. You know, what are they growing up with as Filipino Americans, as Asian Americans. And I found that there are Hollywood movie stars, you know, from the 1920s, from the 50s, the 60s, even the 90s, that were very strong sexual figures. So it depends, I think, what you're looking for. It's very easy to say Asian American men in the movies are asexual, they're effeminate, they're gay, as if those...
Or geeks, you know, or a white guy would just come along and get their Asian women away from the arms of the Asian men.
Right. But, you know, there are extremely attractive Asian men in the movies. Sessue Hayakawa from the 1920s, James Shigeta from the 50s and 60s, Jason Scott Lee from the 80s and 90s. These are heartthrobs with amazing sex scenes, you know, and they really problematize what it meant to be an Asian man in the United States, what it means to love, you know, as an Asian man.
And so I think what the book is wanting to do is also to set the record straight.
Right.
Yes. And also another book that aims to set the record straight is Illicit Flirtations by Racel. And Racel writes about this. This is really very interesting to me because you write about the Japayukis in Tokyo, in Japan.
Yes.
And because you actually worked in the clubs to gain access to these hospitality, do we call them hospitality workers?
They're hostesses.
Hostesses. And you're saying that where the common notion is they are sexually trafficked, you found out by working amongst them that they're not.
Yeah. The story is a little bit more complicated than what we hear in the media or even from the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report, which claims that they are quote-unquote women who are forced into prostitution and therefore are trafficked persons. So first I found out that they're actually not prostitutes, but what they do is that they're professional flirters. And so they are sex workers in that way. But
so like modern day geishas,
exactly,
right? Okay.
Exactly. So a lot of them perceive themselves as modern day geishas because they also, like the geishas, have to play, they have to perform musically. So a lot of them are singers, a lot of them are dancers, and what they really do is that they try to sexually arouse their customers through verbal communication or through stage performance.
And sex is expected? Is that something that's expected, but they can just say no to it, or?
No, sex is not expected because men actually go there for the thrill of the chase. And so they're paying for the thrill is what they're paying for. So it's actually very culturally distinct.
Right. What about groping? What about being harassed? What about, is there such a thing as, you know, them being secured? Are there parameters, are there boundaries?
So there's actually a game that goes on there where the men are there and they're teasing the women and then they try to grope the women. And if the women are easily groped, then there's no thrill anymore. So then they're likely not to come back. So then the game is that the women then have to learn the art of avoiding getting groped.
Okay.
And so they have these ways of doing that where they massage the guy's hands, or that they will sometimes be the one trying to intimidate the guy and pretend they're going to grope the guy, which scares the man.
Right. So if you're saying that, it actually sounds to me now that it can be empowering for these workers as well, because they are kind of in control playing with these men.
Yes. you're absolutely right.
And they're getting paid for that.
Yes. And they
Right?
feel very sexually empowered, not because they have sex loosely,
Right.
but that they feel that they're very aware
And they have
of,
a choice.
yes, their beauty and the power of their beauty to...
When you say they, you're talking about them, and you got to talk to them. You yourself also,
Yes,
right?
so I actually worked as a hostess for 3 months.
Uh-huh.
And,
When you were doing your research.
Yes, it was probably the most difficult ethnographic project that I had to do. Because first, I was the oldest,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the largest woman in the club.
Uh-huh.
And they felt so sorry for me because I was so inept
Right?
at being a hostess.
Yes. Do they? Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll talk about that. Do they actually train for that? And then, the book, and then your event last Saturday. We'll talk more about this when we return on the show. Don't go away.